Welcome back to the Force with Friends podcast. Today, it will just be me hanging out with you. So, we are the friends of Force with Friends. Today, Kevin is on vacation. He's out of the country. So, super excited to have him back next week. But just us today. And we have some interesting Star Wars news to talk about. So, I guess over last weekend, maybe a little bit sooner, not sure the dates, but we started getting reports that Star Wars is going to start cutting back on its production of live action shows. Or maybe not the production, but its release schedule for live action shows. So instead of the usual 2 live actions every year, the report is that we are going to start getting 1 live action show per year. So I've seen some, responses either way, positive, negative. I just wanted to kind of break that down, talk about it, maybe hear what y'all have to think about it. So let's hop into this article first. So you can see here, the report is that Star Wars will be reducing its TV output. So, according to insiders, Disney may be decreasing its Star Wars TV output over the next couple of years. A little bit of jargon here, but it says insider Daniel Richman shared that he heard the iconic sci-fi franchise is set to reduce the number of live-action TV series it releases per year from 2 to 1. So he says that there's still plenty of shows in development, not getting out of live-action TV, just cutting it back to where it is going to be 1 live-action per year. So, that kind of fits with everything we've heard out of Disney. So, not to get too far into like the Disney shareholder stuff, all of the business side of things, but Bob Iger is on the record saying that he wants the quality to improve, not the quantity. So, sounds like scaling back. And so this report, honestly, it's not exactly earth shattering. It's not a surprise to hear, but, I like watching Star Wars on Disney Plus. I make Star Wars content. I like to talk about Star Wars content. So, for me personally, there are some pros for there being content coming out pretty regularly. I mean, I get to come on and talk about it, make reaction videos, interact with fans. I'm fortunate enough to be monetized to talk about Star Wars. So, again, Star Wars content creators, it's good for us when there's Star Wars content to talk about. But taking a step back from that, because I'm a Star Wars fan before I'm a small YouTube Star Wars channel person. So, fan first, I really like the idea of this. I like the fact that they are saying, hey, we are going to scale back. We're going to really focus on one really good live action show every year. It seems as if the quality will be going up, and then there's that anticipation for the next live action show. I really like that idea. So, yes, while it is cool to always have something Star Wars new coming out to talk about, I mean, we didn't have that growing up, so that's a cool thing. Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. And I think that's probably what we've seen a little bit out of Star Wars lately. So, we'll talk about that a little bit, but I did pull up some stats. I saw this chart the other day. Someone shared it on Instagram or Twitter or Threads or something like that. But you can see it here, and it may be kind of hard to read the writings, but it's color coded at the top if you can check that out. But it's showing the total minutes watched for the first 12 weeks of recent Star Wars shows. So that's a lot there. Essentially, we can't get ratings the way we used to get ratings, right? Like on cable television, things like that. So you don't know exactly like how many millions of views or whatever shows are getting per se. But in these streaming services, they can run reports and they can see, okay, how much time have people watched these shows we've put out? So we've got 3 months of data here for it looks like 6 Star Wars shows that have been released over the last few years. And it's not a good trend. So you can start here with The Mandalorian season 3, which was spring of 2023, I believe is when that was coming out. So spring of 2023, you look, it did pretty good relative to, all the other shows we see up here. So you got to think also The Mandalorian is kind of the cash cow of Star Wars. It has been since 2019. So The Mandalorian carries its weight coming off of the season 2 story and then kind of the season 2.5 in the Book of Boba Fett. People were super excited to see what was coming next. The promotionals were good for it, as usual, the trailers, teasers, things like that. So Mandalorian, through the first essentially 3 months of its release, which for sure, that gets you through. These shows are only out for 2 months at a time. So it's the 2 months that the show is out, plus an extra month on top of it. And you see The Mandalorian season 3 did pretty good. Now, I'm not a huge fan of The Mandalorian season 3. I think it's probably the worst. It's probably tied for the worst Star Wars streaming season we've had, for sure. Pretty weak. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, kind of why I think that. But Mandalorian season 3 wasn't great, but still, carried weight here. But you look at the Book of Boba Fett, that came out a lot prior to The Mandalorian season 3. You can see here, it still did pretty well. So it was kind of wedged between Mandalorian season 2 and whatever was coming out next, Kenobi or Andor or something like that. So Book of Boba Fett kind of riding that wave of Mandalorian hype, iconic character, came out over the holidays, I'm pretty sure. I want to say the Book of Boba Fett released like Thanksgiving or Christmas maybe of 2021. You'd have to check me on that one, but I want to say that may be the case for that one. So Book of Boba Fett did well. Then you have Obi-Wan Kenobi was next. So, and I believe that is, from here out, it is chronological order for how things were released. So Mandalorian Season 3 is the only outlier for this. Everything else, I'm nearly positive, goes in the order it was released. But we see Kenobi went down even further. And I mean, the hype for Kenobi, it was up there. I want to say at the time, it was the most watched premiere, like the first episode, I think was the most watched of the Disney Plus for that year, or maybe ever. I don't know. It was big hype for that. Obviously, Hayden and Ewan both coming back, very beloved characters. So yeah, Kenobi didn't do bad. But from here on out, it's a pretty good drop off. You can see it's a big drop off by the end of it. But we go to Andor next, and now Andor, quality wise, it's probably the best Star Wars we've had. Right? I mean, Rogue One and Andor are probably the two best Star Wars we've got under Disney, if I had to say. Now, I'm not saying they're my favorite. Like, I like certain characters and shows and things like that. But just as far as story, acting, visuals, as far as everything like that goes, they're probably the two best. And even the best live action season that we've probably got, excluding Mando season 1 and 2 being Andor, it's a good drop off from the Mandalorian season 3. Next is Ahsoka, essentially neck and neck with Andor. It's my favorite season of a Star Wars TV show, probably. I love Ahsoka, but that's just like me liking the character, liking the story, having Anakin, things like that. That's just my preference, but you can see it's also a pretty big drop off. And then we have the Acolyte. So now this data, the Acolyte only had 5.5 weeks of data. I can tell you things probably didn't get better. That data may be out there, but this is what I found for a pretty chart for the sake of this episode. And not great. So I personally enjoyed most of the Acolyte. There was parts of the Acolyte I certainly did not enjoy. And so when you spend $180 million on a project and it doesn't even do a third of what your most recent lowest watch project was, I mean, I mean, I'm trying to look at this to figure it out, but I don't think it does a fifth or a sixth of what Mando season 3 did. So you look like your best to your worst. That is a huge drop off considering the budget that it had. And so you can see why they are like, hey, let's take a step back here. We have a downward trend for the most part outside of The Mandalorian. Honestly, you could probably throw The Mandalorian on anything and it would do pretty well. So I think it's kind of an outlier here because even season 3 of The Mandalorian, in my opinion, wasn't great. The views were still there. So it's easy to see where Disney Lucasfilm, where they're coming to this conclusion that they need to scale back a little bit on how many shows they're pushing out. So things definitely do seem a little oversaturated. So let's look at 2024, for example. That's the current year we're living in. We started off with The Bad Batch season 3, animated, very good. We have Tales of the Empire, not as good as Tales of the Jedi, still a fun hour watch. The Phantom Menace was back in theaters. That was cool. So that was like a lot of Star Wars there. You go from there to The Acolyte over the summer, starting with June. Then from there, that gets you June and July. I don't think it went into August. I think we were wrapped up by the end of July. And then you don't have anything else until Skeleton Crew comes out later this year in early December. So that's 2 live action shows, a full season of animation, plus like a Tales of the Jedi, Tales of the Empire short season of animation. So that's a lot, especially considering 2 of the live actions are taking place in the same half of the year. You're going like June to December release, which is, it's kind of a short time frame for 2 shows to be being released. And then the first half of the year you have the animated. Now Star Wars doesn't appear to miss on the animation. I'm a pretty big fan of how the Bad Batch story went about. Big fan of Rebels. Clone Wars, there's a lot of it that I do like. It's just a lot to watch. So I do enjoy it though. The story's there. It doesn't seem to miss. That last story of the Clone Wars was great. So maybe always having a really good animated series spelling a high quality, well thought out live action series, maybe that is the way to go. I mean, animation doesn't miss. Live action appears to miss on a very large budget. I mean, that stuff is not cheap to make. And so, maybe the formula is reducing it. So if we take a look at like just how things were before. So let's go way back. Okay, let's go back to the original Star Wars. You've got 77, 80, and 83. The original trilogy is released. So that's 3 years in between each movie. Now, back then, I'm sure it probably took a little bit of time to actually make those films, right? So the technology wasn't exactly the same as it was today. There is that. But 3 years, I wasn't alive for that, but I do have friends that were, and they just talk about that anticipation between each movie. Like you get the Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker scene at the end of Empire Strikes Back. You get the big reveal that Vader is Luke's father, and then you got to sit on that for 3 years. I mean, that's a really long time to have to be like, wow, I wonder if that's true. Where are they going to go from here in this story? So that's, that anticipation building, I think it works out. The original trilogy, I mean, not a lot of complaints there about it. Jump ahead, a couple decades, you look at the prequel trilogy, all right? So you've got 99, 2002, 2005. You've got 3 years in between. Technology was a lot better at this point. I mean, George Lucas, ILM, they had perfected a lot of things at the time. So I'm sure he could have rushed those movies and made them quicker just to get more out. I mean, he had the same cast for the most part in those 3 films. So, I mean, who's to say he couldn't have made those work quicker, but he didn't, and we get them every 3 years. Now, that's the time frame I grew up in. So now I was in elementary, middle school going into all these, but 3 years was a really long time waiting. Like the anticipation would really get to you. So you watch a movie and then you buy all the toys. If you were a kid like I was, your parents would buy you all the toys, right? You would play the video games. You would have a really long time thinking through where's this story going to go next. Like, we knew how the grand story ended, but we didn't know the details. So what's going to happen next? You get to episode 2. Oh wow, Anakin, he's marrying Padme. He got his arm cut off. There's a clone army. Like there's a lot to go there. And you've got 3 years of wondering, well, this next movie he has to turn into Darth Vader and they have to kind of wrap up this whole thing. And wow, those clone troopers, they look a lot like stormtroopers. So what's the deal with that? And so you can kind of let your mind kind of run on where it could go. And you had 3 years to do it. And then when the movie finally came out and you saw it, what a payoff, at least for me as a kid. Now, I'm aware there are a lot of complaints about the prequel trilogy. Understood the lines are pretty cheesy. Did not do the actors a lot of favors. The CGI didn't age very well, I'll admit it. But as a kid in theaters, I can say they were pretty magical to go watch. I mean, I'm a Star Wars fan for life, probably because of the prequels. So again, anticipation, pretty good. Look at the box office for those. Not bad either. George Lucas was not going broke on these movies. He's a billionaire for a reason. So things went okay for him on these. So that's the 3-year time span. But jump ahead to the sequels, okay? Now, box office wise, wow. Force Awakens, which the Force Awakens had the benefit of a 10-year gap. So I think maybe it's unfair to be like, oh, well, there was a movie every year for so long and The Force Awakens was like the highest box office movie ever at the time. It was, but it had 10 years in between with Luke, Han, and Leia advertised to come back with this new cast, new story. J.J. Abrams was doing it. Gigantic box office success. So you have that come out in 2015, Christmas of 2015. Now from there, that's where you start this trend. And I think storytelling wise, it's easier to see this trend maybe than box office wise, because box office, the sequel trilogy made some money. The sequel trilogy did very well in the box office. Rogue One did very well in the box office. Solo, not so much, for a couple reasons probably. But you've got The Force Awakens in 2015. Huge success financially. Rogue One, like exactly 1 year later, 2016. So we have Rogue One come out. I think it made $1 billion. I don't think they were expecting that much out of it. And it did very well, and the story was really good too. So you've got Rogue One. Now from there, 2 years went by between episodes 7 and 8, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. So people obviously are opinionated on the two of those. They did the director relay, but I would say the story from 7 to 8 didn't exactly progress, right? Like it wasn't one director doing it. They had a quick turnaround. The story went in a very different direction. Not that I'm a Last Jedi hater. There's parts I don't like about it. There's parts I really like about it. But you can see here we kind of start this drift, okay? So maybe the story not as well received. Let's just say that. That's fair. Some people really liked it. A lot of people really did not like it and like just kind of quit watching Star Wars because of it. After The Last Jedi, backlash, right? A lot of backlash. You have Solo 6 months later, I believe 6 months later, December to May. So December 17 to May of 2018. Solo flopped. Major flop. Like Solo and the Acolyte are the two big flops of Disney Star Wars at this point. Now, I don't think the story of Solo was great. Wasn't really a story that needed to be told, in my opinion. I don't need someone else to be Han Solo. If you're gonna do it, maybe tell it in animation or something like that. But Solo came out 6 months after a fairly negatively received by the fans movie of The Last Jedi. Also released around the time of Avengers, right? The big Avengers movie that broke like every record. So very poor planning there, considering Disney owns both IPs. Why would you do that? Not sure, but we've got to get more content out, right? Like, oh, Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars. We got to keep making money because The Force Awakens and Rogue One made so much money. We have to keep putting out more and more and more content. We see the quality decrease there. You go from Solo to The Rise of Skywalker a year later, Christmas of 2019. So technically like 18 months later. In my opinion, the worst Star Wars movie. Now, they changed directors like 18 months before the movie came out. Like, J.J. Abrams had virtually no time to make this movie as far as movies go. But again, Star Wars, keep what they had in mind. We got to keep putting it out. More content, more content, more content. What did they do? They put more content out really quickly. And again, the quality of the product we received, not the best. Let's say you loved it. I don't think I've met a person who says The Last Jedi is the greatest Star Wars movie ever. So we can say, that quick release didn't give us the greatest Star Wars movie we could ever have. So again, I think we see that as more and more is pumped out, the quality goes down. Now, look at the live action series. You start with The Mandalorian. I don't even know the numbers for The Mandalorian season 1. So it came out in between all of the sequels. So, I mean, you throw that in there as well. You had The Mandalorian come out the same year as The Rise of Skywalker. You had The Mandalorian come out within the same, 60 days as The Rise of Skywalker. 60 to 90 days. So, again, a lot of Star Wars going on here. And now, The Mandalorian turned out to be great. You've got Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, and a whole little group doing kind of their own thing. Turned out to be great. But again, it was kind of a lot all at once. Thank goodness The Mandalorian was coming out. I think most people are pretty overly positive about The Mandalorian. So that was in 2019. And then you kind of move forward and you start to get all of these shows just one after the other after the other. So have a little bit of a jump between Mando season 1 and season 2. It was over a year, and then Mando season 2 was really good, right? I would say probably better than Mando season 1. That finale was something else, and you go from there and you have Boba Fett later the same year, and then you go to Kenobi Andor, and you just keep going and going, and you have 2 shows a year all from there. So kind of looking at that, the quality is not getting better as you produce more and more and more and more shows, with the exception of Andor, which is like on its own little island, because it appears that Tony Gilroy on that show kind of worked out his deal. He needed time in between the 2 seasons. He needed a large budget. He had his actors. He was going to shoot on set. He had this whole big story planned out, almost as if it could have been a movie. So, again, kind of an outlier there as far as story goes. But you look at the Book of Boba Fett's story as we're continuing to churn out Star Wars content year after year after year after year, multiple shows every year. You have the Book of Boba Fett is partially about Boba Fett. Then we take a detour and we have to explain some Mandalorian stuff, which probably the best episodes in the season when we get away from the Boba Fett story that they were telling. But again, just not, I don't think, a well-written story. Was it fun to watch? Sure. I've rewatched the Mandalorian episodes. I've rewatched the finale because it is a pretty fun episode. You see Mando and Boba Fett fighting together there. You've got the Rancor, Mando's riding a Rancor, like you got Grogu in it. The last episode's fun, but haven't really rewatched any of the rest of it. The story wasn't overly compelling. I've rewatched The Mandalorian a ton. Season 1, season 2, great storytelling. Not so much with Book of Boba Fett. You go from there to Kenobi. Should have been a movie, just my opinion, but instead of a movie, you're like, hey, we've got to get more Star Wars content out to Disney Plus, and we got to put a lot of it out. So you've got 6 episodes of Kenobi when really you could cut out quite a bit of what happened and probably get that down to 2 hours and everyone will be happy, right? You just really focus on Kenobi, you focus on Anakin, and maybe you leave out a great portion of the Inquisitor part that kind of plagued the series as it was. And you have a pretty good quality content. But you make it 6 episodes that has to be put out in a certain time frame to get your 2 series per year put in there. Do it. A lot of filler, not super compelling, not super well received as a whole from Star Wars fans. Like, again, there's some incredible scenes. My favorite streaming scene, probably my favorite Disney Star Wars scene, is that last battle with Obi-Wan and Darth Vader at the end, where Obi-Wan cuts out half of Vader's mask. They're talking. It kind of spells the Mustafar battle in Revenge of the Sith. It sets you up perfectly for their next battle in A New Hope. Again, there were very high spots in that, but it's like, why spread it out into a series? So again, Kenobi, go there. Again, Andor is that outlier. It's a very good story. It's kind of a slow burn. I understand why people don't like it. I kind of joke around like I'm a prime candidate to fall asleep during Andor because some of the episodes are just really slow, but they do have their payoffs. They have really great episodes. So Andor, kind of the outlier as far as the quality of content goes. You go from Andor though to The Mandalorian season 3, and now we've talked about this before on this podcast, but The Mandalorian season 3 doesn't necessarily seem to have much story that it needed to actually get done. So we're going to learn that Mandalore is still a place, still inhabitable. Moff Gideon's been cloning there. You get the Thrawn name drop, so you've got like this Imperial remnant going on. We understand that. The Darksaber's gone, I guess. Let's see, what else? Grogu is like officially a Mandalorian, but you also have Jack Black and Lizzo. You have space pirates. You have, episodes where not really a whole lot happened, like that penultimate episode where they're just kind of hanging out on Mandalore again and getting ready for the big battle. Paz Vizsla kind of dies in that episode. That was one cool scene there. But like, again, the Coruscant episode. How could I forget that gem of a storyline where you take 50-something minutes and go follow the former Imperial cloner and the bad girl who was acting good? Like, come on now. We knew that the whole time. That was a waste of 50 minutes there just to be like, oh, the Empire's back. Well, they've never been anywhere. We've known they're back. So, not great storytelling there. You go from there to Ahsoka. My favorite Star Wars streaming season at this point, but there's still like parts of it that it's kind of, did it need to be 8 episodes the way it was? Like the first, episodes 1 through 5, that gets you to Shadow Warrior, where Anakin comes back. Excellent, right? Like, love it. Then you go 6, 7, and 8 in Peridea, and the story almost kind of loses itself until it picks it right back up in episode 8 and throws everything together. Again, I love Ahsoka. I've rewatched it quite a few times, but admittedly, I can say there are parts of it that don't make a ton of sense and just, seem to be thrown in there. Maybe, they needed another season to come out at a certain point in time, and you got to fill 8 episodes because that's how much our seasons are on Disney Plus, and so that's what you got. So you go to Ahsoka. After Ahsoka, you go animated. You go Bad Batch season 3, and then you get to The Acolyte. Again, I enjoyed it. Parts of it for sure were not great. The story loses itself, right? So now there's a lot of reasons that The Acolyte did not do well. The main reason is the story was just not compelling to a whole lot of people. That's reason number 1, first and foremost. Now, you've got your actors, actresses, producer going out and saying things that could be polarizing, right? Whether you agree with them or not. Obviously, some people disagreed with them, and it kept them from watching the show. Then you get into the show, and I think episodes 1 and 2 were super strong. 3 was not. 4 and 5. 4 and 5, great episodes, by the way. Like 5 has some of the best lightsaber combat, if not the best lightsaber combat since Disney has purchased Star Wars. Bravo, loved it. 5 is probably one of my favorite episodes of Disney Star Wars, where Chimera comes in and just takes everybody out. That was awesome. 6 was fine. It was slow. 7, big waste of time, just like 3. And then 8 just didn't. I mean, it was fine. Plagueis is there. It's always a cool thing to see, but the story just wasn't satisfying, if that makes sense. Like, there were things that didn't need to be there, like tripping over yourself. And so I don't know if their issue was just not being very wise with the show or what, but again, it's a lot of Star Wars thrown in, knowing that Skeleton Crew comes out in just a few months. And so we've just got all of these shows coming out one after the other after the other. So again, it's easy to see, I think, when you kind of look at it that way, that Star Wars has been focusing too much on having a whole lot of shows come out all the time and not really caring about the quality so much as just filling up the Disney Plus catalog, but the numbers did not back it up. So what I'm seeing here as being a big positive is that we are going to have, if all of this is true, which I'm assuming it is, we're going to have one show per year, a live action show per year. Hopefully they kind of rotate, like it's Ahsoka one year, it's Mandalorian the next, it's whatever the next, and then you get back to Ahsoka again later. And so you're getting like 2 years in between certain shows, maybe 3 years. You're kind of having a lot of time to work on it, build it up, figure out what your story is going to be. And then you see that, okay, instead of having 2 in 1 year with splitting budgets between 2, we can put a whole lot of money into one show, make it really, really good, have a good story, and then we build that anticipation up again. Like, oh, it's going to be 2 years till we see Ahsoka again. It's going to be at least 2 years till we see an Ahsoka season, because we know that they're going to be filming in 2025, which is like 2 years after the last one was released. So, like, there's going to be some anticipation there. We're going to have years in between the whole Mandalorian stories going on, which is a good step. So I think that anticipation building up, more people are going to watch, your numbers are going to go up, which is obviously what Disney wants. But at the same time, you're spelling this with movies here and there. So we've got Star Wars coming back to the big screen. You've got animated series coming out maybe 6 months before the live action one does. So you're kind of splitting it up in the year. So you're still getting your Star Wars fix, but there's a difference between the two. I think more people watch live action, although they're missing out on the animation, in my opinion. But you start seeing like, oh, okay, we're going to have time to talk. We're going to have time to speculate. We're going to have a lot of time in between all of this. And it's different stories. It's not just one after the other of the same story. And I think that sounds pretty good. So I put out some questions on Instagram, on YouTube, like on my community tab. And that's what y'all said too when asking for information on this, is that the quality seems to kind of be going downhill. So I'm really excited that we're going to have a little bit of time in between. That's like pretty much unanimously all the responses coming back. There were a couple that were like, no, I want as much Star Wars as possible. I think those were on Instagram. And like, yeah, I get it. Like, I want as much Star Wars as possible as well, but I want as much good Star Wars as possible. Like the best Star Wars we can possibly get. And I don't think pumping out content after content after content just so fast one after the other, I don't know that that's the way we do it. So long story short, I hope this is true. I hope that we have Star Wars slowing down, pumping the brakes a little on the live action, taking a little more care with what we're getting, building up that anticipation, and we're just going to see really high quality Star Wars content going forward. That's my hope. So let me know what you think about this in the comments. Otherwise, next week, Kevin will be back unless he gets stranded in another country. I suppose that's a possibility, but fingers crossed that doesn't happen. We're going to be talking the sequel trilogy, but we're only allowed to say nice things. So typically when we talk about the sequels, Kevin and I have plenty of nice things to say about it. We have our complaints as well, plenty of complaints, but there's always a but when we say something nice. We're like, well, I really love the scene where, Yoda comes back in The Last Jedi, but we're cutting out the buts. There will be no buts in this episode. We are only saying nice things about the sequel trilogy. We'll see how long that episode lasts, but I think after we sit down and kind of start discussing it with each other, there's some pretty positive, quite a few positive things there we can talk about, and I'm hoping that maybe you would agree with it. So maybe be on the lookout for a question for what are some positives from the sequel trilogy. I may ask y'all and share some of those next week. Otherwise, thanks so much for hanging out with me and watching today, and I will catch you next time.